So we're going to start off talking about the instruments used in Kirtan, and what I have here is a sarangi, and this was a bowed instrument that was introduced by Guru Gobind Sahib, the sixth Guru, and it's much older than that though. It predates his time, and it's probably up to 1,000 years old. But the instrument itself has seen many different evolutions. In Kirtan we also have the Dilruba, so this is another bowed instrument, and it just has metal strings as opposed to gut strings, and that was used very heavily by Guru Gobind Singh. Other instruments we have is the Rabab, which is a stringed instrument with gut strings, but it's plucked as opposed to bowed, so it creates a different sound. And this is the instrument that Guru Nanak's companion Bhai Mardana used to play. Nowadays you have more modern instruments like the Taal, so like a Dilruba with a gramophone sound box on it to make a slightly different sound. You have Sarod, which is an evolution of the Rabab, so taking away the gut strings and making metal strings. There's so many instruments, but the key thing to these tanti saj, the stringed instruments, is that they all have sympathetic strings. So when you play a particular note, you're not only touching that note, but you're also making one of the sympathetic strings vibrate. So you can see on the sarangi we have about 40 strings, and only 3 of them are the strings which I'll actually bow. So all of the other strings are sympathetic, so they just vibrate as I touch a certain note. One of the strings will vibrate with that note. So this means I'll have to tune all of the strings to the Raag or the melody that I'm going to play on a certain day. So you can see, and all of these strings create a much more rich sound. And so it's said that the sarangi in particular can replicate the comes the closest replication of the human voice, because it's such a rich sound. It's said to come closest. But all of the Dilruba, the Taos, the Rabab, they all have sympathetic strings, which makes typically people associate that with the Indian sound, because in the West we just have playing strings, we don't have strings which vibrate in the background. So that covers mostly the stringed instruments. Jodhrup will talk a bit about the percussion instruments that we have in Kirtan.
Yeah. So these are called Jodi, and they originate from the Pakawaj or Mardang. So Mardang was a South Indian drum, and it's a barrel-shaped side drum. And then the Pakawaj was a similar shape and always played like this. So I don't know when it was that they decided, or how they decided to chop it in half, but this was used in the darbars mainly to accompany the string instruments and vocalists. It was only later that it actually became a solo instrument. So the technique that what they use is the flower to generate sound. So you mix flour and water and stick it onto the skin, and then you generate this bass low sound, and it gives very loud kind of sound to the instrument. So it was the 5th Guru?
Guru Arjan, yeah, is the one who kind of introduced this instrument into Kirtan. And one thing to note is in the darbar, this would have created a really loud projection. So an instrument which developed from the Jodi is the Tabla at a later stage. So it became more rounded, and they used metal to make it instead of wood. And then they with advances in technology and processes of making instruments, they replaced the atta, which you have to apply every time you want to play the instrument, with iron filings, which you could permanently stick on there, and it would much more durable and much less maintenance of the instrument itself. But the sound quality changed as a consequence, so it's no longer an open, loud sound. So the tabla is much more closed and not so voluminous as the jodi itself. And also the technique for playing jodi as opposed to tabla is very different. So maybe you can demonstrate the different styles of strokes.
Yeah, I mean, to start with, the ta, so like the main open sound, in jodi would be quite a sort of loud open sound. In tabla, you're going to strike it in a totally different way, so it's going to give a much more delicate sound. So it's a bit out of tune. So yeah, and it's even with the tete or dha, you've got tete like that or tete like this instead of tete in Delhi, very closed sound.
Tabla style is a lot more with the fingers, so jodi uses the whole hand, much more powerful sound.
So rather than
One thing to note about also these instruments is the style of accompaniment. So in Kirtan we have the time at which the first 5 gurus especially, the style of music which was prevalent in India at that time was Drupad, which is a form of classical singing which originated in the mandirs, the temples of India. And this, through the Mughal era, developed into a style which became more for entertainment. So it changed from Drupad to Khyal, which is the predominant style at a later point in history. But Drupad, as I said, it came from the temples, and it was the focus was on the shabad, so the words that you were singing were given prime importance. And the style of percussion would always been with pakawaj, either the barreled instrument or jodi pakawaj, which is, as it was, just split in half. And the sound is a lot more resonant because you have the different style of percussion alongside. The compositions tend to be slower, not generally, but not all the time, but kind of as a general principle. And the emphasis, as I said, was on the words rather than just doing kind of ornamentation with the voice. So Khyal became a lot, you use your voice to do kind of acrobatics and show off, whereas Drupad was really about delivering the shabad with using Raag and Naad, the techniques. So this style of percussion really suits that style, which Guru Nanak would have been singing, Guru Angad, Guru Amar Das, Guru Ram Das, up to Guru Arjan at least. Then the style would have changed slightly as time went on. So it's important to note that these instruments really support that style of Kirtan which the Gurus themselves would have been singing in the Darbar. And it's even documented that Guru Gobind Singh and Guru Tegh Bahadur was a master of these instruments, so they maintained that style of singing. The tabla, different style of percussion, suits more to Khyal, which was a music style which came later. And as I said, it's more for entertainment, so the things that you can do on the tabla is kind of more for entertaining, really. The use of Drupad as well, as opposed to, he could have gone with the times and changed more to the Khyal style of singing for Kirtan, but he didn't, because the Khyal singers had to do very intricate things with the voice, and so they can't have as much volume as some of the Drupad singers, and so he realised that. And Drupad, the singer has a very strong projection, and so again it's for in a big darbar outside with no microphones. That style of singing is what can be heard best. So they were very intelligent in how they utilised what was around them and different styles to suit the environment. The concept of a raag is quite difficult to explain, because there's no definition, you know, there's no word which you can use to really define it in English dictionary. But the way I like to describe it is, you can think of it as a piece of art, a very ornate and delicate picture with, you know, all sorts of colours, all shades, characters, images of people, expressions on the faces of the people, the lighting, the background, all the elements of a picture, you know, combine to give a piece of art. And a rag is similar in my eyes in that the notes that you use, the duration of the notes that you use, what pitch the notes are attuned to, the length of the notes, the use of silence in between, the order of the notes, the sequence of the notes, all of these kind of things. It's infinite, really. You know, how many pieces of art can you create? It's infinite. So a rag is, I liken it to a picture in that sense. It's really, it has an essence, it has a feeling, and the feeling is described by the sound that you used when you're singing it. So the sound totally describes the rag. Nothing else could really describe it. But the rag obviously is thousands of years old, so it predates, you know, the Gurus weren't the first ones to use rag. And in India, that the use of rag goes hand in hand with Indian classical music, which is a very ancient tradition. You know, it's the time of the Vedas, which is, you know, thousands of years old. I think in the Samved, at that time, we see a first record of the use of 7 notes. So this is Sa, Re, Ga, Ma, Pa, Da, Ni, Sa. Ancient sages recognized the power that music had. So, as I said, each rag has an essence and a feeling, which is very complicated and described only through, you know, very particular usage of notes. But you can imagine if a shabad has a message to give, so the music helps you really deliver that message and helps the listener really take it on board. So you have rags which have a very devotional feel, and, you know, that suits very much shabads where you're and words when you're trying to call on the divine. You have rags which are more meditative, more serious. You have rags which are more about love, so you're talking about love for the creator. You have rags which are about longing, so feeling separation and wanting to merge back with God. So a rag can help you express that feeling, the longing that the Gurus had when they wrote the shabads. So, you know, all the 60 rags that we have in the Guru Granth Sahib, each of them has its own characteristic and its own essence, its own feeling. The linkage between rag and the shabad is very important, because it really delivers the message how the Gurus intended. You know, if they had a certain feeling when they were talking about, when they had the revelation of Gurbani, that's the feeling which they had to sing it in. In terms of north and south, there's totally different. They both have Sa, Re, Ga, Ma, Pa, Da, Ni. We use the same 7 notes in North Indian and South Indian music, and they also have the concept of rag in South India, a ragam, and they use the same notes, but the names they attributed to a certain rag would have been slightly different. So it's just because they're, you know, North Indian culture and South Indian culture, although being very similar in some respects, they're very different in other respects. So, but the key concept of rag and taal and rhythm, the way they use rhythm, the concepts are fundamentally this, you know, shared. They're shared between North and South Indian music. Just in South Indian, these days they use the mridangam, which is still a barreled-shaped percussion instrument. And the instruments that they use nowadays, they use the Western violin. So it's just as things developed, they had slightly different variations, but they still use rag. A lot of the characteristics are shared, basically. I'll just try and demonstrate some differences in the usage of notes and how one rag is different to another rag. So, firstly, I'll demonstrate a rag Yaman, or Kalyan, as it's known in Guru Granth Sahib. And this is the notes that you're restricted to in this rag. Are all of the notes are left pure or shud, except for the ma, so that is sharpened, so it becomes ma tibar, sa re ga, and ma tibar, pa da ni sa. So I'll just give a brief demonstration of how this kind of rag sounds. That's the kind of sound and characteristic phrases that you'd hear in Raag Kalyan, and the feeling, which is hard to put it into words, as I said, is a very complex and ornate picture which the rag tries to give across. But you could a feeling which is quite strong in this rag is that of bhakti and quite devotional. So that's the feeling of Kalyan, and the phrases that are used when you and the notes. So we have I'll show you this firstly the scale. Normally you think of sa re ga ma pa da ni sa, all pure notes. You'd have that's all pure notes. In Kalyan, we have so you hear the, instead of there's a different, just that one sharpened note. It's a different feeling.
Yeah, it's funny, in Western music, this is called a mode, and it's a Lydian mode, and it's the augmented fourth, so it's the sharp fourth, and they actually talk about it being a very bright, happier than happy, you know? But I don't know if that relates to Raag, but you know, it's interesting to...
Yeah, so that's just the set of notes that we're restricted to. Then the way we approach when we're ascending, we have aro and avro, this concept of aro is like, in Sanskrit it means like growing or rising up, and avro is the descending. So the notes that you skip, there's certain notes that you have to skip, and certain notes which you do use. So in Kalyan, so we don't touch the sa and we don't touch the pa on the way up. That feeling is very characteristic of Kalyan. Singing is the same, whether you use sa re ga ma or whether you don't sing any notes, you just sing akar, just you know, using a. The notes are preserved. I don't have to sing sa re ga ma to actually sing the notes sa re ga ma. So in Kalyan, if I'm singing just the aro and avro, ni re ga ma dha ni sa, sa ni da pa ma ga re sa. So I can do just the scale in Kalyan, with Akaran just sing the Sargama. I'll show you, just to contrast the different feeling, a different Raag. So this is Raag Kedar or Kedara, and it varies in that instead of just using sa re ga ma pa ma ga re sa as we had in Kalyan, we actually have two of the mas. So sa ma ga ma pa ma ga. It uses different mas, and we skip different notes. So just to show you some of the phrases from Kedar. So it's a very different sound, even though we're just adding a, not too different scale. The phrases are totally different, and the kind of ras, which is more predominant in this Raag, is that of love. So it goes with Shabads where you're often singing about the divine in a very kind of beloved, my beloved way, and it's just very different feeling, Kalyan to Kedar. So I'll demonstrate again briefly. So Kalyan. Kalyan, and then Kedar, totally different Raag. So you can see each Raag has this a very specific and particular set of phrases, and they combine to give across a different mood. The gurus in the Sikh tradition have capitalized on that and made use of this amazing technology of Naad, and how you can impact the listener just through a set of notes. They realize the power of this, and combine that with the rhythm, and how you can utilize that to really deliver a message in a much stronger way. The using of mixed Raags, which is not so common in Hindustani Sangeet. So in Guru Granth Sahib we have Raag Gauri, and then we have Raag Gauri Purvi, then we have Raag Gauri Purvi Deepki. So 3 different Raags, just by changing Raag Gauri slightly, and mixing it with Raag, Purvi, gives it a different feeling. And then they added another flavour, Raag Deepki, in there, and it creates, the Gurus created these Mishrat, these mixed Raags, and it created totally different Raag from mixtures of other Raags. And there's many examples, Kalyan Bhopali, mixture of Bhopali and Kalyan Raag. They say you can't really invent a Raag, it's revelation. So the ancient sages who created Raags, they say it was revealed from kind of higher realms to the sages, and they just kind of came to them and they sang it, and then the system of Raag developed from there, because they just started singing a melody, and then only later did people try and break down a Raag into a structure and say this is the Aror, this is the Avror, this is the Vadi, the key note, this is the Samvadi, the second important note, this is the Vivadi, you shouldn't play that note. So it was only broken down at a later stage. It wasn't like, people making rules for a Raag. It was revealed, and only later did they say, oh, this Raag classified under this Tat, this scale, this system. Classification was what humans did later. So if you look at Raag Jayajavanti, which was created, I think, by Guru Tegh Bahadur, and Raag is, as I said, it's got its own feeling, and it's such a complex thing that it's amazing that we have Guru Tegh Bahadur who had this, Jayajavanti, Raag Jayajavanti would have come to him, and he would.
So yeah, Taal is really, it's just like a framework or a cycle. It's very natural in the sense that, when you're walking down the street, you naturally feel a pulse or a rhythm and a cycle to that. So what they adapted was to think, okay, either there's a cycle of 4 or 8 or 16, it can be anything really, but to hold on to that cycle and to give tension and release through that cycle. So whether it's a 8 beat or 7 beat, within that framework there's a way in which you can create that tension and release just through rhythm. So then with Tabla you have a certain language which they set up using the boards, so using certain notes. If I just clap Teen Taal, which is 16 beat Taal, it would be Da, Din, Din, Da, Da, Din, Din, Da, Da, Din, Din, Da, Da, Din, Din, Da. So you have claps and waves. So the claps signify more stressed beats, and the waves are like the empty beats. But the empty beats then create tension for the stress to come back onto the one.
It gives like a balance.
Yeah.
So all of any Taal, any rhythm structure, with however many beats, however many matras it has within it, will always have a Tali and a Kali. So one open side when you have the wave, and then other places where you have more emphasis. And this gives a real balance to all of the Taals.
So if we're playing Bakawaj style balls, so more of an open style, I play like a 12 beat. It'd be Ik Taal or Char Taal. So Ik Taal would be Tabla, Char Taal would be Bakawaj or Jodi. So it'd be so that's the Char Taal, that's sort of Geordie open sound. Rather than, I could play the same thing, Char Taal, but Tabla balls, so it'd be so it has a very different sound.
Rhythms which people catch much more easier, and so all all pop music, all Bollywood music comes in either 3s or 4s. So it's either 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, or 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, and each of these has their own. It's the most catchy rhythms which we have, and so it dominates the music that we hear when we're out and about in the world of Maya. But in reality, how many rhythms can we play? There's so many different numbers. However many numbers there are, that's how many rhythms there are. So you can have 3 beat, 4 beat, 5 beat, 6 beat, 7 beat, 8 beat, 9 beat, 10 beat, 10 3/4, 10 1/2. There's all sorts of rhythmic variations, and they all create a different feel, because it's kind of unnatural, and they create a different flow in the music through a different kind of number, and it might be harder for people to catch where the rhythm is. So for that reason, it's maybe not as catchy as kind of 3 or 4 beat pop music and Bollywood music.
Play something which is 7 beat. How would that work?
Yeah. So 7 beat tabla would be din din ah din ah din ah. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. To a lot of people it feels unnatural, but when you keep repeating it, it actually becomes as natural as 4 or 6. But it takes time to feel it. But that's the beauty of the process of Taal, is that you really get inside it through these odd time signatures.
Yeah, people find it difficult at first, but even like 5 beat, 7 beat, 5, you have 5 fingers, 5 toes, and it's a very natural number actually. And it's only when you actually try and get absorbed a bit into the rhythm of 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
We're just not exposed to it.
Yeah, we're just not experienced.
Show us a 5 beat.
So 5 beat would be, I can play Japtal. So tabla din na din din na din na din din na. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So it's 10 but divided.
Yeah, so it's 5. 2 sets of 5 make 10. Yeah. It's a really infinite world, as with Raag. Taal is equal in its own right, the world of rhythm and the world of melody. There's so many variations, so many Raags, so many Taals. And within the Taal, the compositions that you play.
And Qaida, the process of Qaida is quite important. So especially when it progressed to Tabla after Jodi, Zakir Hussain was one of the first to start actually playing solo, tabla solo. So within the framework of Taal, then you start playing compositions on top. So they're called Qaida, and they're basically just a succession of notes on top of the Taal. So whether you're in 8 beats or 16 beats, you're then going to play other notes on top of that within that framework. And then you start getting even more into that, where you start, it's called Partaal, where you're manipulating, using
variations,
the same variations, but using the same strokes. You're then progressing and soloing using those strokes, and that's like a whole world of infinite possibilities really when it comes to rhythm, because you can break it up, cut them up in lots of different ways, and that's where a lot of tabla players want to get to, because it's just, you can really express feeling through, rather than just playing a Taal and keeping that beat and not doing anything, or at least maybe just filling in slightly. But when you do tabla solo and Qaida, then you're really able to express feeling through rhythm. Yeah, just like in the Raag, you have, from the north to the south, you've got quite a different style. Yeah, Tabla's the same thing, Geordie's the same. So you've got different gharanas, which are located all the way through India. So if you're in Punjab, you would play in a specific style, quite a closed hand. The more you go south, the bigger it becomes. You go to east, Benares, it's quite an open style of playing. You've got Calcutta, you've got Delhi, which is very, very closed. It's funny how you go north and it gets very intricate, the fingering. So it's amazing to be able, just with a very simple instrument, it can become so complex, So
yeah, and the style, the way in which they play the hand technique is different from gharana to gharana.
Yeah.
And also the type of balls which they prefer. So the style of composition that they sing. So in Punjab and Benares, they kept more of the compositions and balls associated with the Pakawaj. So those two gharanas in particular, we still see the influence of how the Pakawaj style balls are still prevalent today in the Tabla gharanas. Whereas Delhi and Farrukhabad, different other gharanas, they really developed their own tabla style and moved quite far away from the Pakawaj style of playing.
It's changing from one beat to another beat.
Yeah.
So whether it's that you're in 6 beats and then there's no gap, you're straight away into 8 beats or 7 beats.
Yeah.
So it's constant. There's a flow from one beat to the next, and it goes with the lyrics or the melody. In fact, you're really just backing what the melody's doing. I'm not just like doing my thing, I'm listening. If it's changed, I'm just got to follow straight away. So that's my idea, my understanding of Partaal.
Yeah, I mean, it's very interesting actually, because when you look at a shabad which is written in Partaal, and you just look at the page, if you have each line, one after the other on the page, they'll be doing like this. The shape of the line, the length of the lines is highly varied. So in general, that's kind of so whereas some shabads are kind of, each one has a very specific rhythm, so when you read it, if you're doing part or something, you can really feel like the rhythm of the shabad is there in the line, and it really has it's kind of innate rhythm. Whereas if you try reading some of the Partaal shabads, it's very hard to get that, because I'll give you an example. The shabad in Raag Partaal, Sub Bachana Bol Guna Amol, and this is one line. The next line is Kinkari Bikar, very short. The next line Dekhari Bichar. Then the next line Gur Sabad Tyaye Mahala Paye, so longer again. Har Sang Rang Karti Mahakel. So that's just the Rahal section, the section which we repeat. And each line, one has got 2 words, one's got 2 words, then it's back to long again. And if you try and fit one Taal to sing that kind of shabad, it's very hard, Then the antara portion, which is after, when we're singing the next lines, Supanari Sansar, you change them to match the length of the line. In that shabad, for example, we'd sing the Rahau line, which is the Asthai, the chorus, you can say, in Partaal, which is a 12-beat cycle. Then to sing the antara portion, you'd sing it in Rupak, and then you go back to Partaal when you sing the Asthai again. Then you change to Iktaal to sing the next antara line, then you go back to Partaal again. So it's a very kind of clever principle of changing the taals to suit the length of the line and the natural rhythm which comes when you're singing the Gurbani. Whereas some shabads will be very standard length and have a very natural rhythm, in which case you can keep the same taal. But the Gurus were really kind of, they created the concept of Partaal. They were the ones that it wasn't done before. Just you can't play one composition. It has to be in one taal. Traditionally, that was the view, that you play one composition, then you might play another composition later, which would be in a different taal. But the Gurus realized that, okay, maybe we can try different taals within one. So the whole composition will just be switching from one line to the other line in different taals, and it requires a lot of practice and coordination between the musicians and the Kirtani. But it's something unique to the Sikh tradition, because the Gurus actually created this concept of changing taals within one composition. It's hard to say, because I think you don't have to be an expert on Indian classical music to go to an Indian classical music concert, and be blown away and just be like, you can be in Anand, you know. Same when you listen to a great Kirtani, you know, they can take any listener to Anand, and you just be in bliss, even you having no knowledge of what they're doing. Just the sound, the current of sound, and the way they're using music, it can touch anyone, you know. Music is such a universal language that you could say that. But at the same time,
can I add a minute? Because I was reading, because I'm starting to look into Raag as well, just for my personal sort of practice and knowledge and stuff. And I was reading online that there was a few studies that they did with just ordinary people listening to Raag and writing down their experience. So what they actually found out was that, you know, that you would want to hope and, you know, wish that your Raag would be giving, because you want to be portraying a certain feeling, but whether or not that person is experiencing that is another thing. But through this study they realized that there was a high percentage, if the Raag was to do with love, they were experiencing love, or if it was compassion or whatever feeling, that they were actually feeling that. So that power that can be generated through Raag has been proven that, you know, you're receiving that, rather than you know someone saying, oh yeah, no, it was alright, but I didn't really feel anything. Or obviously there are going to be people who don't have that specific feeling, but more often than not that's being portrayed and it's affecting them in that specific way.
That's just music alone, you know. And then you add the Shabad there, and you know, when you start to have words and people hearing, if you know, understanding Gurbani is very important in that sense, that when you hear the Shabad, combine that with the music, you know, it's a totally different level. It takes the music to a totally different level if you're hearing words and understanding what's being sung. I mean, that's really where it's at. You know, the core of it is what's being sung about, and then adding the music on top is just like killer blow, you know. But
everything is vibration, you know. The essence of every material thing is vibrating. So you add vibration, poetry, add it all together, it's going to have, you know, an effect. So
yeah, I mean, there's a good example of one of the great musicians of the Mughal era. Who was singing for Emperor Akbar, who's known as Mian Tanzin, and he was said to be one of the greatest musicians in the style of Drupad singing. And as you're saying, everything is a vibration. So how music can affect the listener, but also the material world that we live in. So it was said that when Mian Tanzin, he could actually bring about change in the elements around him. So when he used to sing the Raag Malar, which is the Raag of the rainy season, he said he could bring about, a storm and make it start raining on all the fields, and everyone would be really happy because he could, make sure the crops keep growing. And if he'd sing Raag Deepak, he said that he used to walk around the fort singing, and when he used to sing Raag Deepak, he would all the torches on the wall would light through fire, so he could make fire. And the myth is that the way that he died is that he was so engrossed when he was singing this Raag Deepak that he actually self-combusted. So he set himself on fire through his own kind of passion in singing this Raag Deepak. The Vaja, which is the most common instrument which we see accompanying Kirtan in the modern times, and it's so prevalent these days, the Vaja as the main instrument of choice for Kirtaniya. It's an instrument from the West. It was invented in the West to go with the Western scales. So the whole idea of having a keyboard is to fit the even tempered scale, which is the standard kind of framework in which Western music operates. However, that was brought from the rest to India, and it's ended up being that the Indians have adopted this because it's an easy instrument to play. To pump the Vaja and touch a few notes is not that hard, and you can sing Shabad with it, and you can it's very easy to do. However, we've lost so much of what Raag and what the music of India is all about. So to demonstrate this, there's a concept in Raag which is that of meend. So this is sliding between notes. I'll give you an example. In Sri Raag, which is the first Raag to appear in the Guru Granth Sahib actually, the characteristic is heavily dependent upon the meend, the slide that you apply between notes. And on the Vaja you simply can't do that because you can't slide across the keyboard. I mean, you can try and fake the effect by dragging your finger up and down the keyboard, but it sounds a bit like jazz, or I don't know. So the concept of a meend in Sri Raag is something like this. So you can see it very heavily relies on me being able to slide my finger up and down the fingerboard, and with all the stringed instruments that we have in this tradition, that's possible because I can put my finger at any point on the fingerboard and I can produce kind of almost an infinite array of notes. And by doing that, you know, the use of slides and meend is possible. On a keyboard I simply couldn't do that, and this is something which the voice can do as well. So it's almost like you're restricting the voice by playing with a Vaja, because you know the Vaja can't do that, Harmonium can't do that, anything with fixed notes or frets with a fretboard can't do that, but with stringed instruments you can always slide. And so it's not by coincidence that stringed instruments is what is the traditional instruments of choice in Kirtan, you know. And they may be more difficult to play, but the expression and the infinite array of, you know, the microtones. So this is another concept unique to Raag. In Western music, you've got 12 notes on the keyboard, but as I said, not being able to slide and touch all of the microtones in between of those notes is something which is lost. So actually, although we say we've got sa re ga ma pa da ni, 7 notes, those notes are actually flexible, much like Indian time is very flexible. So you can really, you know, in some rags the note will be actually not the same. You can have the same note, ga, in one rag and the same note in another rag, but it's actually a different frequency. So in Sri Raag, which I was just playing, the re is actually not, you can't even touch that note on the Vaja. That's how bad the Vaja is for playing some of this music. So so if you've got, if sa on the keyboard, you can do sa re, no problem, but the re, sa re in Sri Raag is actually it's actually lower than the normal re. So on the keyboard I can't actually access the re which I need. So my voice is going to have to try and sing ever so slightly lower than the Vaja, but in reality that's so difficult and it can't really be done, because your voice naturally hears a sound and it adjusts. That's why we have the tampara, so that our voice adjusts and stays in tune. But with the keyboard we restrict it and we're sending our voice to the wrong re in practice. So in Sri Raag the re is, as I said, is much more, it's actually lower than the normal re that we have. So sa re, sa re, it's ever so slightly lower, and because we have the concept of the shruti, the microtones in Indian music, we have access to that, and I can reproduce that on the sarangi or on the dilruba or on any of the stringed instruments that we have. But on the Vaja I simply wouldn't be able to do that, and so I've lost the characteristic of that slightly flat re which it has. It's a very distinctive sound, and we have it in other rags as well. The rag Dodi, the ga is ever so slightly flat. So sa re ga re sa, and on the keyboard you can't quite access that. And even, I mean, I'm just picking two examples, but really every Raag, you could think that every Raag, each note in that Raag is unique to that Raag. So the feeling, I could play the same notes in another Raag, but it would be slightly different characteristic to the note, a slightly different frequency that the note will vibrate at. And each Raag has its very own peculiar sets, and this kind of knowledge of this and usage of this has really been lost. But you know, the scale and the length of the string, you know, even in maths they say the length of the string is infinite, you know. So the amount of notes and frequencies which we can touch is really infinite, and Raag preserves that infinite scale of sound and nad. And with Western instruments, on a violin you could do that, but again, violin is a tanti saj really. So although it's a Western instrument, we can reproduce techniques that are used in Raag. So I guess you can hopefully get a glimpse into how Kirtan is so powerful, you know, such a powerful technology, I'd say. And really, you know, the Gurus, we can't underestimate what a package they've put together for us, in that it doesn't matter where you come from, you know, what your upbringing, what your background, anyone who listens to Kirtan, you know, done with a proper Raag and Taal and the tanti saj, the original instruments. If you imagine just as it was when the Gurus, in the Gurus' times, as it was then, this kind of whole package of technologies and music that they've used is really for anyone to experience. So I encourage you to go away and listen to more, you know, Raag Kirtan in particular, because it's, you know, it's such a powerful thing, and the Gurus have prescribed it not for, you know, it wasn't for no reason that they prescribed it. So I really encourage you to go away and listen to different people that have still preserved the tradition of singing in Raag Kirtan, and only in that way will you really experience how this, you know, what they've given us is such a great gift. In experiencing it is the only way, and through music it really lets anyone experience it. You know, music is a universal language, and it's not something which is targeted at a specific audience. So it's for all of us to experience, and only by going away and, you know, actively searching for people that still preserve the tradition of singing in Raag and with the traditional instruments can you really get a sense of how do you experience that, and how does it make you feel it, as opposed to you know, Bollywood music or Kirtan done in a different style. You know, I encourage people to go away and listen and see how that makes them feel.
For me, it feels it's a very much a natural path, because, you know, music is so universal and so just like vibration is ever present. I really feel that they're linked to nature, you know, and to be in contact with nature and to use these instruments to connect with the divine. It's definitely like a dharmic path. It's a hukum. It's totally, you know, living with nature and alongside, and, you know, rhythm is such a part of it. Melody, vibration is such a part of it, that and because of these instruments, the way they're designed, you're very much, you know, vibrating with nature, rather than like moving into such a you know, intricate instruments that have been developed that maybe are moving away from that natural vibration, you know, like electronic instruments, though they still hold some part in there, that maybe that you don't feel that that you connect with it as much, you know. That's for me anyway.
So this is a Shabad in Raag Kirtan, and this notation is also in Raag Kirtan, because sometimes people take Shabads but they don't sing it in the right Raag. So this Shabbat is actually, a notation is in the same Raag. This is 16 beats, so you can see 4 sections of 4 beats each. And a Shabbat goes, there's 2 parts, which is one is chorus, astay, and one is a verse, antra. Normally the astay is the rahautuk, the line with the rahau, and then the other 2 are the other verses. So each verse goes on the same tune. So there's only 2 tunes to learn when you're learning Shabbat. One tune for the chorus, 1 tune for each verse has got the same tune. So we're going to go first through the chorus. I'm going to sing the notes first, how they're written, if you can follow on the paper. So I'll start actually with the Raag. So first when we learn Raag, there is a row of row, the scale, up, ascending and descending scales for the Raag. So for Kalyan, it's that's the ascending scale, and then so that's simple ascending and descending scales. And now the Raag only uses these notes. We don't add any other notes. So I'm gonna sing the chorus in the notes. Ni ni ri ri ma ga ma da pa ma ga ma ri ga. So I just sang the first line of the chorus. Now I'm going to put the words on the same tune. The words are Man Tan Japiye Bhagwan. Mane Tane Japiye Bhagwan. So I'm going to use these 2 machines. This is the electric tempura, so it just gives a drone, like a sort of background sound, a bit of a mood. So it's tuned on the same note where I'm singing from. So if I was a man, I would be singing from, I'll put it here, that's how, no, here. Yeah, that's where the man sings. The women sing from here. So this is my note, this is my sa, so I sing from here. And it just goes on the background a little bit lower. And this is a tabla machine, so if I don't have a tabla player to practice with, I'll put it on. I choose the Taal, which is same as my tune. I've got tin Taal, it's 16 beats, so I choose tin Taal, that's 0 0. Then I press start, and I choose the same note for my voice, it's G sharp. So it's a little bit fast. I go, say 10, yeah. So now it's going in the circle. See the up to 16, then 1 again. Okay, so I'm gonna start my Shabbat where it has to start, and I have to follow the beat of the tabla. It's not actually very hard to learn because all the notes are written. You can add more things, like there will be alabs, like improvisations, but that's like next steps. So first steps would be just simple, just follow the notation, figure out where the keys are, and then just put the words onto the tune. It's a little bit hard, but it's manageable. So if you want to learn, it's possible. It's not very hard. Yeah. So good luck to you if you want to start learning.